Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our fall symposium. Next on our agenda is the panel discussion group, A Meeting of the Minds, led by Kristen Arnold. Here's Kristen, a master facilitator, leading authority on moderating panel discussions, and a good friend to CS&M. She will be our moderator to you today. So here you go, Kristen.
Thanks so much, Margaret. It is always great to be here with the CS&M family. And today we are going to be talking about moving forward. What's in that future? And we've got a meeting of the minds for all of you. So let's start with this question. When we think about nutrition management, what comes to mind? What one word comes to mind when we're talking about our future? What's that one word? Now, panelists, you write down something on your piece of paper, but in the chat box, anybody who's listening, you write down, what's the one word that comes to mind when you think about your future? Write it down. And drum roll, please, panelists. You ready to show your word? All righty, show your word. Oh my gosh. Melinda, I can't see yours. So we're going to start with you, Melinda. You have preference. Melinda.
It was preference. Yes. Sorry about that. I chose preference because, as we move forward, there's a lot of diverse cultures and people and dietary needs coming into the healthcare system, especially long-term care. And it's going to be a challenge to meet everybody's needs, but also try to balance everyone's choices, but nutritional values, budget, and everything else. So it's quite a challenge and very diverse.
It is a challenge. And thank you very much, Melinda Podolsky. Melinda's a client service manager with Care West Royal Park. So thank you so much. We're going to move over to Laura. Laura, what was your word? Laura Tamblin-Watts. She's the CEO of CanAge, Canada's National Seniors Advocacy Organization. She says, what? What do you say, Laura? You need to unmute yourself.
I said yuck. My word was yuck, because actually this is what we hear about from families, from residents all the time. And I don't have a good answer for them, because I say, listen, unless we're investing in nutrition management, unless we're investing dollars and cents as well as capabilities and supports, it's not actually going to change. And so that this is a driving force. We know that the talented professionals that we have here exactly understand where we need to get to. But I say yuck because it means we're going to have to both change the way that we think. We're going to have to advocate for this as a key priority in a time where there are lots of priorities. And the food is always the thing that we hear about. So I, however, say that with a little bit of a twinkle in my eye, because I do believe there's a good way forward.
The twinkle in your eye. So I think that goes for Heather Truber. Heather Truber is the Executive Director of Provincial Operations Support, Nutrition, Food, Linen, and Environmental Services. Heather, what was your word?
My word was opportunity. So it's interesting to build on what Laura says with yuck. I see it as an opportunity to move forward. Things have been very, very challenging, but I think nutrition managers have to use this opportunity to take advantage of changes in technology, in the work that they've been asked to do over the last few months, and build on that and expand horizons and use this challenge to make it better moving forward.
And finally, Professor Heather Keller. Heather is with she's a professor and Schlegel Research Chair in Nutrition and Aging at the University of Waterloo. And somebody's trying to get in there, aren't they?
No, this is my nice new office, which is environmentally appropriate in that if I don't move enough, the lights will go off, which is not how I hope to be perceived today. The lights are totally on. So my word was hopeful. I think I chose that word because I've been doing long-term care nutrition for 30 years. And I think this is the time. We've got people, families, residents governments, federal government, not just provincial governments, regional health authorities, we've got the media, and we've got all the people that are working and doing such great work in long-term care now seeing we need to change. We all need to change. And so there's some opportunities that are happening now, as Heather Truber indicated. The HSO technical standard is going to be coming out, as well as the CSA standard around buildings to improve this space, as well as the care that happens in it. I think as well, the COVID pandemic has made us realize we now have to make change. There's no choice about it. There must be change. We've been talking about, you heard rumblings for years about things that needed change, but there wasn't the impetus because not everybody was on the same page. And then finally, I think the point is I made that collective interest in change is happening. And so this is the time.
Well, you know, if we look at our chat box, Julia Cooper is echoing that around change management. We've got Lori who's saying retirement, maybe. Regulations came up with Sylvia Nora says, the unknown, Catherine Harris. There's the entrepreneur, innovation, adaptability. Tracy goes, this is the time. This is the time. So what is this time? So let's talk about trends. What are the future trends that you're seeing in the next 3 to 5 years, specifically, not just in healthcare, but in nutrition management? What are the trends that you would see? So I'm going to start with Heather Truber. I'm going to have to say Heather Truber and Heather Keller so that I don't confuse the two Heathers or you know. So Heather Truber, let's start with you. What trend do you see?
I think a couple of trends is the first one is having to work on collaborating and working and being responsible for other areas within healthcare. So if you're the nutrition manager used to just be the nutrition manager, we have more so all across the country that they're having to look after other areas of the facilities and be responsible for environmental services, linen, maintenance perhaps. So an opportunity to collaborate more and take advantage of that and use the transferable skills that we have as nutrition managers to take on those other roles. The second one I think is—
Hey, wait a minute. You only get one at a time. So
I've got a bunch. Thanks.
Okay, I know, but we're gonna go around and then you can pile on. So anybody else want to chime in? Anything that you want to add to this collaboration and working with others?
Well, I think I will actually, Kristen. And I think it's, again, because of COVID-19, everybody had to change what they did, right? And in some shape or form. And so as Heather was indicating, food service managers, nutrition managers have had to take on different roles. I think all of us are realizing we have to take on different roles. And so that's a trend. And some of those things may be putting aside our disciplinary boundaries. Maybe some of it will be putting aside the way we think about hierarchy in the home and considering what is truly best for the resident. That's what we're trying to achieve. And whatever ends we need to get, whatever means we need to get to that end is the trend.
Interesting trend. Melinda, what trend do you have?
I was probably on the same lines, but flexibility and change, but based on everyone's previous discussion, also expanding roles for all health practitioners. We're all having to work in very diverse communities now and work roles. So those are the things that really certainly triggered for me, and a lot of HR issues that are coming with it.
What about those HR issues? What's a trend that you're seeing in HR issues?
Well, again, expanding everybody's roles, adding, a very diverse workforce because we're dealing with multiple programs all at once, but also other HR issues are, again, mental health issues that are really coming to the surface and are really highlighted now because of the pandemic. And we're seeing early retirements or people just tired and burnt out and increased sick leaves.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think the notion that because we have staffing shortages, et cetera, we have to rethink what team members do, and then how do we support them to do that, right? I think that's a key trend. And COVID has unveiled all of this for us. The problems are already there, quite frankly, right? So for example, I see a trend being, let's pick up on some of the good things that happened during COVID. We led to cohorting residents, which meant then consistent team members with staff, with residents. How about that, where the resident actually knows the name of the team member that's coming in that day and knows them all week long because it's the same person? That's an amazing trend that we need to pick up and keep using, right? So some of these positive things that happened out of COVID that led to actually better care, we need to figure out how to entrench.
You know, I saw everybody's head shaking in that COVID just brought forth the problems that were already in existence. So there were lots of great things that happened as a result of COVID. And sometimes we just think about the negative side. Okay, so I'm just going to call a lightning round. Great things that happened in COVID. Put it in the chat box. What's the silver lining? Great things that happened in COVID. And I'm going to go quickly around the room. Okay, so I'm going to start with Laura. Great thing that happened with COVID.
And this will be my trend as well. So I get 2 for 1 in here. It's impatience with the current status and embracing of digital and innovation. It's both of those things together. And particularly when we're thinking about anything to do with sorts of institutional care, it has beggared the mind how behind we are. The fact that people were trying to donate iPads, but people didn't have internet. I mean, that is just explaining how poor our technology is, how disconnected things are. And the good news is the technological advances and people's readiness for that have now changed.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is a great silver lining. Heather Truber, silver lining. You're muted.
I think
There
from
you
the
go.
other aspect of technology, sorry, just to build on that one a bit, is the opportunity for education and upgrading even for nutrition managers. So technology has just, hopefully that trend or that positive from COVID will allow us to kind of reinforce the education, upgrading, and allow nutrition managers to get more skills to handle these other challenges like HR that's been mentioned.
Heather Keller.
So I'm answering the positive of COVID-19.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that homes went to 2 meal seatings because they had to spread people out. But guess what? That meant that food and nutrition became the activity in the home that everybody was part of, right? Getting residents to the dining room, having recreation staff and other staff involved in food. Food became it. It was the activity. It was the thing that we spent time on. And I would hope that we continue to spend time on it.
Melinda.
One thing I found, again, being a very small long-term care site, we really had to rely on each other for teamwork. And the customer service and the teamwork really came together. And that was a beautiful thing to see. And I think that's going to hold strong going in the future because we had to multitask and help each other out.
And I'm looking in the chat box. I'm seeing an even closer relationship with the team, Laura said. Kita said the considerable differences between our limits and needs, more communication with families and residents. Susan, the fragility of the system. Oh, now that's interesting. Why would that be a silver lining? That's kind of interesting. The fragility of the system. I'm curious about that one.
I think she's right. I think it is the silver lining because we were able to talk about that system and not just yell into the wind, which is what so many of us have been doing. I'm trying not to be a downer on the panel. It's just that we've been living on the very front ends of very difficult situations. And, you know, Heather Keller, when you're saying that it went to 2 foods, I thought, oh yeah, except for when they were locked in their rooms and couldn't get any food, right? So I think that the reality of how inflexible we have been or how fragile or what little bench strength we have is actually a silver lining because it's in the common conversation now. And as opposed to its usual sort of hidden, closed off in the shadows approach. So I do like that we're confronted with that and that people really understand that this can't continue.
Yeah, and if I look at the chat box, there's a lot of creativity in operations, being flexible, the management team working more closely, things being simple, teamwork. These are all really, really good positive benefits that may not have happened if we didn't have the gift of COVID that keeps on giving, darn it.
But I think that the key thing is here is not to lose these things now that we're moving back to normality, right? Maybe back to normality, because if people have built those teams, let's not lose that, because that's what's needed to make change, right? And we showed with COVID-19, we could make change. It took time, as Laura indicated. Some things are not right, for sure. People got it wrong and they figured out, oh, this is not right, and having to switch around. But QR codes now are being used to track things that weren't being tracked before in long-term care, like hand washing. Now that's great. We should keep that technology for tracking food consumption, other things, right? So not lose these positive things that have happened with change, including the teamwork, because we need close, cohesive teams to make change really happen.
Yeah. So Heather Truber, you said you had other trends. You want to share another trend?
Well, I think it was really around that technology. So, but I would just like to say that the not losing it, you know, I think it's going to be a challenge to not kind of, everyone wants to go back to normal or what we perceive normal to be. So I think it takes some effort on people's parts to not slip back into, well, we always used to eat at 8 and 12 and 4. And, you know, just whatever our routines were in the sites. And so I think we really, you know, it's maybe a call to action that people have an effort to continue to focus on it, because for some of us that have been around for a while, we've seen, you know, there'll be this big spotlight on it and then it fades away because it just isn't, as we say, sexy enough, long-term care or food in healthcare. And so I think we need a call to action to really keep that focus on it. Now, I know we have a lot of things coming up with standards and a lot of the work that Heather is involved in, which is fantastic because that'll help keep the light on it. But I think the trend is we need to have a concerted effort to keep the spotlight on it and not let it fade away.
And if I can just add to that, Heather, that I think what's going to keep the spotlight is not making the change so hard to do that it gets overwhelming. So we just say we can't do it, right? So we have to figure out solutions that are achievable and feasible and quickly. So if it, for example, just taking the timing of meals, you know, going back to what we had before and recognizing, hey, smaller groups of people, 2 seatings actually worked really well. What do we have to put in place to make it work long term, right? And figuring out how to do that quickly. So finding those low-hanging fruit changes that everybody saw as beneficial and entrenching them, right? That's what we have to do so we don't lose that ground.
I always think about going into Star Trek, you know, when they touch the console and he gets his Earl Grey tea hot, or he gets his spaghetti bolognese or whatever it is. I don't think that's 3 to 5 years away, but I think the idea of Uber Eats, of going to the airport and ordering food on an iPad, the idea of personalization is something we can't come back from and something people don't want to come back from. Just building on some of the other points that we've talked about, you know, people have less comfort now with this idea that you can have these very different standards behind those walls. And they say, well, what do you mean if I can't get something delivered, you know, to my door? Why can't I get it delivered? This is my home too, even though it would be a long-term care home. So I think that personalization piece that we talked about, that cultural piece, and that desire for, you know, what do I feel like right now? Now that is challenged. And I think the other trend is the increasing fragility of the residents in long-term care. So we have to be thinking about that as well, because it's one thing, and I was thinking about COVID, it's one thing to put a tray down because you may need to not be able to eat in a congregate setting at that point, but then, you know, those trays were being collected and no one was feeding people. And so this idea is we need to understand that nutrition has to get into a person's body in a way that's also effective, culturally appropriate, and engaging. And we saw that fragility. That's a great word that we use. We saw that fragility in breakdown. We can't just be this idea of planning. It can't just be this idea of placing. It actually has to be integrated eating too, and how important it is to have all of those steps with, I think, more choice.
Yeah. And if I can just pick up on that, I think we've been saying culture change for a long time. We have to live it, right? And we've been saying person-centered care for a long time, but we have to live it, and relationship-centered care. And so now there's no choice that we have to do these things and do them right. Yeah.
So Susan Hernock in chat says, shout loud and proud, the nutrition is a big part of resident care.
Yeah.
Melinda, you're grinning from ear to ear. Where's the grin coming from?
Well, I just completely agree with the statement. I mean, sometimes squeaky wheels get the grease, and you just have to be, I always say I try to be pleasantly tenacious when I'm trying to vocalize and get the needs met from my residents and staff and families. And I will be pleasantly tenacious, and I'll keep going and be a little pleasant thorn in someone's side and trying to get what I want and best advocate for them all.
Pleasantly tenacious. That's an interesting choice of words. Pleasantly tenacious. So let's move into, okay, these are some great trends. How do we as nutrition managers make sure that we keep the gains? How do we leverage these trends? How are we pleasantly tenacious? Melinda, tell us a little bit more about your pleasantly tenacious strategy. What does that look like to you?
Well, lots of times I'll look at the information that's gathered and what can I use to help me promote the fight that I'm trying to fight to get what I need from my families and residents. So you can look at some of the documents. I know going back about 4 years ago, an example is we needed, some of my residents weren't getting their showers every week because they couldn't fit into the showers in their room. And we are an older facility, we did not have a larger shower room. So I looked at standards and protocols and policies and brought those in to help me fight my fight, bring in the data. And sure enough, once you spout some of those policies and standards that the government puts out, the approval for a bathroom was approved. It just took a few years with the building piece of it, but it got us on the way and the goal for upper executive and the health services to deem it important enough to do. So you have to look at the tools and what tools you can bring in to help your fight and cause. And sometimes the data is all there. You just got to research it and find it.
Laura, how are you pleasantly tenacious, or would you call it different?
I like pleasantly today. We think of it as problem solving. You know, CanAge is Canada's national seniors advocacy organization. We work at the community level, at the government level. We work with partners, and we try to think about where agreement lies. And, you know, if you have 20 people in a room, but you can agree on 3 things, then you've agreed on 3 things and you could move those things forward. And I think that building trust and that open dialogue, once you have that, you can actually move much more quickly. I love that you said you got it built. I thought, oh my goodness, it took 3 years to get it built. Like, who didn't get a shower in 3 years is what I also worry about. So great that there's the solution. I think we all have to think, you know, how can we help you in that? Like, I would be able to pick up the phone. I would be able to hit social media, and, you know, CBC would come in with a camera and say, what do you mean this person hasn't had a shower? So, you know, you have to think about how we're doing this in a supportive way, not to knock down the sector, but to have solutions and to have ways of doing it, and then identify, as you said, what those obstacles are and then push through them. It is exhausting though. And I think that's the thing that we have to talk about is system change is tiring. And we're talking about the mental health that Heather was talking about. You know, for those of us who are always trying to push for positive change, you know, there's so many things to push for. And that's when I said, yuck, it's just because, you know, we're pushing for rebuilds, we're pushing for home care, we're pushing. So you have to find out, how is it we're going to identify this as important and urgent? It hasn't been important and urgent, but it's been sitting around that extra piece. We need to push it forward. But it's also that critically important quality of life question. When anyone asks you, what do you care about in long-term care? Yeah, it's not so much the care. They talk about the food, and they talk about that social engagement around the food. And we need to prioritize food as social care as well as healthcare.
So Helen Truber, you've been pushing skill diversification. Tell us a little bit about how, because I hear a lot of this push and be tenacious, and it's exhausting sometimes. You know, what do you do to try to achieve change? How do you leverage the agenda and the trends that you see coming?
I think a couple of things. We're very much, we have to not give up. So I think you do have to be tenacious in an appropriate way. So very often we get a change. We have a lot of meetings. We decide, okay, this is how it's going to be changed in the site. And we do a pilot or a trial because we like doing those as well. And then it didn't work quite so well. So now we're not going to do it anymore. So I think we get caught in this cycle of trying it. It didn't work 5 years ago, so we're not going to try it again. I think people have to really work to be creative in the solutions and know that it's going to take a while. Unfortunately, we're collaborating with nursing, all of the therapy staff, perhaps, maybe the other departments. But I think that collaboration and kind of quiet tenaciousness, that's a word, is what you need to succeed and get things to happen, because it takes a long time and you have to come at it from a number of different angles, and don't give up. I mean, most of the successful program innovations that we've seen have been because someone just didn't give up. They just kept pushing in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, I love the idea that don't accept failure. Failure just means it didn't work this time. So what's the next time? So Dr. Heather Keller, you have a lot of familiarity with the standards about what has to come down. How do we react in a positive way to standards that are coming at us and not enough resources?
That's a good question. So I think the first thing is getting involved in the current standard that's being created, because then if you're involved, we'll have the right standard. So there's opportunity to engage between now and December to give your feedback, what you think needs to be in the standard. Once the standard's written by the HSO Technical Committee, there'll be an opportunity for reviewing it. Again, get involved in reviewing it. It won't work unless you think it's going to work, right? So we need the people that are working in long-term care, the residents in long-term care, and the families of people living in long-term care to review the standard and say, this is what we want. And that's going to then lead to change. Back to Heather Truber's comment, change often when it comes from above and is tried and piloted and dropped, it's because it's not been built from the ground up. People have to want what we're changing, right? And so with this HSO technical standard and the CSA standard, we're building it from the ground up, hearing from people what needs to change, putting the standard together, and then getting that feedback about, did we get it right? Did we hear you? So I think that would be the first key thing. Then implementing that change. I think there's some things that are going to be in the standard that are going to need investment in resources in the form of money, of course, in the form of training, and also in the form of changing our attitudes about things. So there's going to be that need, and I don't think you can do it all at once, for sure. It's going to be a robust standard for sure. And so you have to think about, what are the areas we need to work on most, or which ones in our home are people ready to work on? That's, again, a key quality improvement process, is where are people at and what do they feel passionate about changing? If they feel passionate about changing it, then we can do that work together, and then it will be sustained. But if it comes just from the top down saying we must do that, it is harder and may not last and may fail in a pilot.
If I could build on that, their technical standards are coming out for, as you said, the HSO, the care standards, if you want to call it that. I'm involved with the other aspect of that with the CSA, looking at the standards for operations, infection prevention and control, and so on. And just that, what we call the built environment. Do we want refrigerators in rooms? Should people be able to cook in some way? When we're thinking about what independence and person-centered look like, what if I want to go make a cup of tea in my own room? What does that look like? Rethinking some of those issues with regards to what patient-centered, what client-centered, what person-centered, whatever you want to call it. What does it look like to live in your own home when it comes to your own nutrition and your own social engagement around that? So I think the great work that the HSO is doing, you still have to do it on our side too. So I'm making sure that that anyone who wants to get involved with that, the same information is available. Let us know what it should look like in the built environment and what the risk tolerance is as well, because we tend to over support our own risk in some ways. And people, yes, you could burn yourself with a cup of tea, but you could, where is that risk threshold for people in their personal experience?
And laughingly, the first thing I thought of when you said fridges in rooms is, who's going to clean those? So that's where that kind of resistance comes into some of the changes. And so involving environmental services, where a lot of the impact on some of these things, particularly related to the builds and the materials that are used, I think that's a good indicator of the other groups that need to be involved in any kind of development of standards, and then the success of them being implemented moving forward.
So there's
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and there's a happy in between, right? If we can't have fridges in people's rooms, at least have an accessible fridge. How many homes do we go into that you can't even get a cup of tea between meals, right? Because it's locked away. Could there not be a space where there's just a simple beverage station that people can monitor and see, oh, it's clean, it's all right, and just get water or tea. I've been to visit people and you can't even make a cup of tea between meals, right? So there's got to be a happy medium between the two.
And I think that's a really good point, but reinforces having all professionals involved, because from working in that environment, we get pushback from infection prevention and control, because someone might go in there and touch all the tea bags, and so then they're contaminated. So, I'm not being objectionable, I'm not objecting to it, but these are the things that as you try to make this change, that's where you need to involve all those other professionals, because that's where the resistance comes from.
Yeah. The resistance usually does not come from lack of understanding of a standard or a desire to create a better patient experience. It comes from, am I asking for compliance, or am I asking for commitment? And commitment is the entire system working together. There's an interesting comment in the chat box. It says, managers are too overwhelmed with day-to-day tasks and needs to focus on change effectively, in my experience. So you could have the best intentions in the world, but if you're already stretched thin, how do you layer on new initiatives, new paths? What would be your recommendation? Melinda, I'm going to start with you.
Well, from my experience, I try to balance everything out in dealing with the day-to-day work that needs to be dealt with, customer service, immediate response. But I always try to focus on one small QI project at a time. What can I build on? What can I get going? So we're not all overwhelmed, because too much change is not great for staff either. So again, find out what residents or families or staff want to work on, and take that and use it as a buy-in to how you want to build. But I try to do small pieces and small steps at a time.
They call that the termite strategy. Little itty bitty things, you just eat at a little time. Yes. So Dr. Heather, what would you recommend for managers who are strapped?
Yeah, and so I got to say, I'm on the opposite side of things. I'm a researcher, and so often when I do research in a home, we provide a bit of funding to support that. So it's kind of artificial in a way. But I really like Melinda's point about the little things, right? If for example, if noise is a problem in the dining room, figure out where the noise is coming from. And then the next step is, okay, how do we change that noise? Maybe it's the scraping of the dishes. Let's just put a spatula there today, and it's actually linked to or some way connected to the cart, so it doesn't go wandering away on us, and it encourages that change, right? So I think it's those little things that really work, and when making the change, involving the people that are part of the change in that decision making, that's key. They know what works and they know what doesn't work, and they'll know why something isn't working that you've tried to put into place. So that's the empowering of the team that I'm hoping our earlier conversation about the gains with COVID of stronger teams that communicate better. This is where we need to build on that.
And I think from a experience for family caregivers, from residents, from people whose home it actually is, let's not forget that that's actually the most important thing. It's not really whether or not you bang a pot because it's the fastest way to clean the pot. If you had that happening in your kitchen or your dining room, you would not put up with it. So making sure that residents and family councils are part of these conversations and driving those experiences has to be key. And I know HSO and CSA are really coming from that focus. But let's not forget, when you're thinking about team management and so, it really is in the service of the people who live there. And we need to make sure that they're identifying it for you. The other great news is there is really good information about it. And so much of it is in fact implementable. So I think that piece where you're pulling that group together with residents, with families, with people who are on the front line and saying, all right, which strategies are we going to incorporate first, I think is a really important piece, but not without the residents.
Absolutely.
Building teams, so important. Dr. Heather Truber, sorry, I'm trying to get these Heathers right. What's your best recommendation for building teams?
Well, I think so if we're talking about teams within the department or a team within the facility or the organization, I think they all kind of fit. The same process would follow, that you need to communicate, you need to be honest with what is going on, you need to let people know, and if there is, and just have ongoing frequent communication. So probably those two things, being honest. If you don't know, don't say, make something up, say you don't know and you'll go and find out. But also communicating as much as you possibly can and having lots of meetings. Anyone who works with me knows I like to get groups together to problem solve for sure. While I've got a minute though, I'd like to go back to the whole comment about being not having enough time. And of course, everyone is really busy, but the one tip that I always have is we often like to continue to do what we've always done. And I'm going to use examples of checklists and audits and various different things, kind of busy work in some cases, because if you're not going to do anything with it, why do you keep keeping track of it? But, we really need to look critically at the work we do. And if it's value added, and are you doing it because that's the work you like to do? Or are you doing it because it's work you have to do? And so for nutrition managers out there, that's what I would recommend, is critically look at what you do, because there may be you can find yourself 15, 20 minutes a day, 2 hours a day, because we all do like to fall back on what we like to do. So just wanted to circle back on that one as well. Thanks.
I think that's a really good point, Heather, that there's, sorry.
No, go right ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think there's a lot of that happens, is that some of it's routine. We've always done it this way, and we've always tracked these things, and it takes time to do that. But you're right, if we don't use that data, what is the point of it? And that leads me to my segue, which is we collect some data because we're told to, right? And again, the same thing, are we using that data? And how should we manage that, the conversation with the bodies that tell us to collect that data if it's not being used in a meaningful way, right? So I think there needs some pushback perhaps around what it is we're collecting and why we're collecting it.
I had a great nursing instructor.
So especially with that, go ahead.
Sorry, I had a great nursing instructor back many years ago, and while I was in university, and she always said, keep in mind what's realistic versus idealistic. And that's something I've always kept with me, and what's realistic and what we can really manage on the floor.
So speaking of what you can really manage, Alana Sharon has an interesting question. She said, food inflation rates at 10% right now. I'm interested to see how we can make this change happen without extra funding. Thoughts? I think that's a future trend too.
Well, one of the trends I was going to bring up was actually plant-based proteins when thinking about food, right? And they tend to be cheaper than animal-based proteins, but not all our residents are ready for that, right? So that I think some of the issues around our cost of food is going to lead us to some of those choices of plant-based proteins, and then figure out how to make them accessible and palatable for our residents who also want to eat healthy, right? So for example, my mom's in a long-term care home and she's just fine with eating beans as beans, but put them in something that is a cultural dish she's not aware of. Now that's a problem, right? So it's figuring out how to do these things in a way that works for your residents. The 10% hike though in food, my goodness, it's just, we got to deal with the budgets for food, quite frankly, I think, to deal with that, right? And really value that.
Other comments?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
go
actually
ahead.
think that budgets are something that can be practically increased. You're thinking about what's hard and what's easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but there is a really strong agreement around the increase in food budget. That is not an uphill battle. And so when we're thinking about it and we're considering changes in regulations, which are happening across, the lawyer comes out at me, when you're thinking about the changes and the ways that we can implement those, increasing the dollar budget, I think, has to be. It also has got to require more interest and more opportunity to eat elsewhere. If you think about the trends of university students with their passes and they can eat in any one of these different places up to a certain amount, I think we're going to be able to think about ways in which different value adds can be more creatively put in. Now, I'm not saying two-tier or extra, but families already support often and supplement food. That's a very well-known piece. I think we just need to untether some of that regulatory spend and think a bit more creatively about how we can add flex.
All right, so ladies, we've had a rather interesting conversation about trends and the application of some of those trends. Now let's just shift gears a little bit. So I'm going to tee up a question. And audience, I want you to answer this question too. Do you agree or disagree? So just put in the chat box, do you agree or disagree to this question? So our first question is, we've been talking about all these trends and things that you can do. So nutrition managers have more influence than they think they have. Do you agree or disagree? Agree or disagree? Okay, so the whole panel has thumbs up. Tell me why do they have more influence and how can they influence more than? Heather Truber.
Well, I think part of it, it's kind of historical. You know, it stems from many years of food services being in the basement, and still is in most cases, and then it's the support department and not having a high profile. So but I think we have to get over it. You know, we've used it as an excuse, and I think if the nutrition manager has a responsibility to be a professional, act in a professional manner, participate whenever possible on committees, events or anything to do to raise the profile of food, and not just around, we get cookies when we have a tea or a party, make sure there's food. It's around the importance of food, but you have to use the opportunity to be a professional, prepare documents, speak like you know what you're talking about sometimes, even if maybe you don't, and just really work to be part of that senior management team at a site and be viewed as a go-to person in the organization. That in itself will help raise the profile of the food service department and the support services if you're in charge of support services as a whole. So I really think it's a responsibility and maybe not a comfortable place for a lot of people. Maybe we were more comfortable just being in the basement working in our office. That's not where we need to stay.
So I'm looking at the chat box and I'd say 90%, maybe a skosh more, agree, but there's a few people who don't agree. Melinda, what can people do if you really think that you don't have that much influence?
I think, as boundaries and roles are expanding, they'll definitely have more influence. But I would recommend my staff, if they're feeling a little intimidated, start doing research, start taking leadership roles, getting on committees, taking courses to expand their comfort level of mentorship and preceptorship within their own group. As a manager, I always look for people with potential and leadership skills. A lot of them are formal or informal, and giving them the opportunities and education to move those skill sets forward.
Laura, were you going to say something?
People love chefs. They love cooking shows. They love to see what happens in the kitchen. It's interesting and it's on trend. And I think one of the things we can do is capture that trend and open up those kitchens, open up the idea of F&B, open it up to creativity. And I think that as a result, it will become more passionately interesting. People won't just complain, they'll actually be part of it.
And the chef shows up for this chef talk. My mother would like that. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next question. Next question. Ready? Next question is, accelerated trends from COVID have created more opportunities for us as nutrition managers. Do you agree or not? COVID has created more opportunities. Okay, everybody's saying thumbs up. What opportunities? What opportunities? Laura, start first.
I think people have seen how terrible it's been when people couldn't eat together, they couldn't connect together, and it's been a story of sadness and loneliness. And I think that combined with the idea of not being able to bring in particularly culturally specific food, that extra pain point has really raised the issue. So I actually think that COVID has, because of the awfulness of it and because of the story of people losing weight and because of the disconnect, I think it's opened up a new opportunity for improvement.
Heather Keller, your comment.
Absolutely. I would totally agree with Laura that COVID has led us to realize the importance of food for sustenance, obviously. And when someone's in the room and that was the only interaction they had from staff was someone delivering food, and then it had to be good food, right? And it could be something they could eat. And when all those things went wrong, we saw it, right? And so I think the importance of food as an activity, the importance of food for emotional and psychological and physical sustenance, it's there, and we got to keep that front and center for everybody.
Okay, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, so I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, you ready? You ready, audience? You ready, panelists? It's better to be a jack of all trades than an expert in one field. Better to be a jack of all trades or expert in one field. Do you agree or disagree? Melinda, we're waiting for you. Yeah, okay, so yay, we have some differences of opinions. Melinda, why don't we start with you? Since you seem to be on the fence, why?
I'm on the fence because I think from what I'm seeing a lot of in our manager support services, they're becoming a jack of all trades. They're overseeing many different departments. But everyone we found in Care West anyways, everyone has a specialty that they take over and maybe take charge of. So someone might maybe look over food services. Somebody else might look after housekeeping, and that might be their, they might be the lead of all the support services for that particular, I guess, that particular domain. So, but as roles expand, we're going to have to be jack of all trades. But I still think we all maybe even have to have a specialty that we can offer to continue being vocal for that particular setting. So, for example, would be nutrition.
Laura, you disagree.
Yeah, I don't want my dentist to take out my liver. Like, I actually want them to know what they're doing in their area. They're not generalized healthcare providers. My vet is not my podiatrist, right? There's a reason why we have expertise. And I think it's really important to remember that. What I don't agree, though, is that they should be siloed, right? We need to bring experts and people with expert lived experience as well together. So if you're in an echo chamber of your own speciality, you're doing it wrong. But I do want deep expertise in particular areas as opposed to a modicum of okay across the spectrum.
Okay, so Heather Truber, why do you agree with that statement?
Well, I think just to build on what Laura said, it's not that we wouldn't, I believe they should be multi-skilled in that a lot of the skills, particularly in support services management, are across the board. You need good organizational skills, good human resources skills. You need to know how to manage and motivate people. You need good financial management skills. So I think for some professions and areas within healthcare, you're right. I wouldn't want, the dentist taking out my liver, but I think in the profession that we're talking about, it is good to have, or you do have, just by the nature of the work, skills that are transferable and that could help you manage other areas really well. And we have many, many, many nutrition managers who manage support services or have gone into that area completely, or even healthcare management administration areas with some additional training. So I think it's not a specialty that we're necessarily talking about. I think it's more those general kind of management skills where you're a jack of all trades.
Tracy Christensen says our workforce is on the cusp of change. I love that, cusp of change. And we will have a deficit of employees. Focus on expertise, but open yourself to acquire additional skills to support. Well said. Well said. Heather Keller, did you want to add something to this conversation?
So I'm a pragmatist as a researcher, which means I do lots of different things. And so Laura would hate that because I might do them not as good as I should, but it means that some interesting things happen as a result. And so I use that mentality to think about what Heather Truber said, managers. Nutrition managers are managers. And so I think that it automatically means they have to be a multi-skilled person to do that role.
Yeah, you see, Heather, no, you're a researcher and you're endlessly curious and you're bringing your methodology and your rigor but what you are not doing is trying to be necessarily a personal support worker without that training. So no. You don't get off that easy. I'm also a researcher too.
Oh, well.
So what would make a difference, Laura?
I think it's important to actually appreciate professionalism different from expertise, right? I think what we were talking about is professionalism and skills around personal development. Absolutely. Everyone should have those opportunities. And our group has fantastic professionalism. So reach and stretch and build and so on. But I think that we need to be open to new areas of expertise that are less comfortable for us. So if I'm looking at food services, okay, yes, how do we build it inside the building? How do we make sure that people have options around, QR codes? What do we do if we're going to adapt different things? So I think that our degrees of expertise need to be matched with others that we don't usually talk to. I think one of the things that we need to get much better at is looking far outside of our healthcare box for other solutions. And we need to be talking to people to see what it is they want, because it is not always what the team thinks they want. It can be, in fact, quite different.
Exactly. Okay, so we're heading down the stretch. We have 10 minutes to go. And so here's the final question. Okay, final question. If there is one thing that you want the audience to think, feel, or do as a result of our conversation today, what would it be? Who would like to go first? All right, Heather Truber.
Okay.
and then you get to pick on the next person.
Oh, okay. I think the one thing that I would encourage is that the traditional way of looking at being a nutrition manager has to change. It just can't be, I work in one facility, I do this, and that's what my job is. I really truly believe that, and I think CS&M as an organization has a responsibility to adapt to that and provide support and education and work with the colleges to change the training to be more of kind of that, encompass some of that. So I think that is the thing that I would see moving forward needs to change. It's just builds on all of these different things we've talked about in terms of trends, that really the profession and nutrition manager role needs to change. And I would throw that back to maybe Melinda.
Well, I certainly, if one thing people can take away from today is developing a lot of their other skill sets, because roles are changing and roles are expanding. And so we just have to start, developing a lot of the other social skills, a lot of the soft skills, emotional intelligence, things you have to deal with human resources, because our teams are getting larger and we're have to dealing with more people and all the other issues that come with it, the human resources, and I say the soft skills, emotional intelligence.
And who do you want to send it to?
I'll send it to Laura.
I think we need to have more fun. I think if you ask residents what they want in their lives, they're looking for joy and purpose and vibrancy. And I think if we ask our staff what they want joy and purpose and vibrancy and a living wage. And the living wage piece we have to talk about at some point too, because there needs to be some structural changes there. But these are points that bring us together. And I don't think we're sharing those joys. We have lots of great expertise. We know the degree of nutrition and we understand the fragility, but I think we're not enjoying the experience and enjoying that co-creation of food the way that we might in a cruise ship or a restaurant or something else. So I think we need more joy, vibrancy, and purpose.
And you're going to send it to, yep,
I can send it to Heather Keller.
Well, and I love that last comment, Laura, too. I mean, joy and purpose for everybody, right? Regardless of who they are in the home, right? Staff, residents, family, etc. I think if I would say one word, I hope feeling wise from leaving this, I'm hoping the audience is feeling more hopeful and optimistic. So that was my starting word, if you recall. I'm hoping that they've heard this conversation and see that on the horizon, there's some really interesting things that they can be doing, they can be part of. And one of those things I want them to think about doing is the standards. So both the CSA one as well as the HSO one, get involved, right? And get your voices heard so that you're truly engaged and your homes are truly engaged in this process of making change, and the residents and families within them. And then finally, I leave you with the idea of what I hope will be a result of this is real change, real culture change specifically. Back to Heather's view, it's a culture change around you can't do the same things the same way anymore, right? And Laura's point about joy and purpose, that's all culture change. It's changing the way that we think about doing this, what we do in long-term care, which is living. It is not just caring.
Excellent. You're not off the hook yet. Audience, what's the one thing that you took away from this panel discussion? Put it in the chat box. And while you are doing that, I'm going to ask the panelists, this is the surprise question. What's the one thing that you're taking away from this panel, from this discussion? Not what you want them to take away, but what are you taking away from this panel? So audience, please put in the chat box, what are you taking away from this panel discussion? And panelists, so I'm going to go in reverse order. Heather Keller, you get to start.
Well, the only thing that comes to mind, quite frankly, Kristen, is commonality. You know, I thought there'd be more diversity in our thoughts and ideas for future, but I see commonality, which means we've somehow all come to the same place, which is amazing to me, despite our very different paths of getting here.
Laura.
Budgets and HR. I always figure the more you end up doing professional work, the more you end up doing budgets and HR. And I have real empathy for that, because these are going to be times of change. But this is a point of advocacy that people are agreeing on, and you can't do it with creativity and joy alone. You actually need budgets and HR, and CanAge is on your side. So happy to help to lend our voice, and you can feel free to join for free at canage.ca/join. We think that you should get budgets and HR.
There you go. Melinda.
One thing I think it was a great reminder that Laura did say, and I want to build on, is the joy in living. You know, when I'm tired as a manager of doing budgets and HR and dealing with customer concerns and getting all those wonderful gifts to build on, sometimes I just walk around my sites and laugh and remember why I'm here and talk to people and talk to staff, and it just brings smile and joy, and it reinforces why I'm here. So, you know, again, it's just a reminder about joy in living and having purpose.
And Heather Truber.
think the one word would be hopeful. I think it's to listen, and I know the work that Heather's doing on the standards. I think that's really positive, and Laura really promoting through her organization the residents and family side of things. And I think it's really, we see that it's a challenge moving forward, but again, at probably any point in my career, this is probably the most positive I've felt about, where long-term care might be headed in the future, and that we might make some true steps forward in improving the situation for them. So yeah, hopeful is my word.
Hopeful. There's a lot of really great comments in the chat box, and I hope panelists, you get an opportunity to take a look at them. It's about change and adaptability and flexibility and being hopeful and just looking at things differently, using research standards. So a big thank you to all of our panelists, a big thank you to the audience members for sticking with us. And, change is inevitable, and we have a lot more influence in the way that we are pointed, in the direction that we're pointed. And it has been my pleasure to be moderating this panel discussion. Margaret, what is the one thing that you took away from this panel discussion?
Oh, there was so many things to take away. And I guess you've given the nutrition managers, as well as the students that are also present with us, many trends to reflect on and see that right across Canada, we have pretty much the same issues and problem-solving techniques that are being tried. And we also see some positive outcomes for improvement that may have always been there, but now that we've had pandemic, we may actually see that we can make some positive change, and they may even come about a little quicker because of this, because it's on the right focus, right hand, always in government, and everywhere you go, you hear about food, and food we realize is so important. So this has just been amazing. And I want to thank you, Kristen, and to all of our panel participants, Laura Tamlin-Watts, Heather Keller, Melinda Polotsky, and Heather Truber for their participation and industry insights of information. I think that we've got many takeaways to reflect on. And thank you very much. So this will come to the end of our day. And so we'd like to do 3 more $50 gift prize draws. So if we could start the spin of the wheel, please. And our next winner, Daphne Spear. Great, congratulations. Number 2, spin of the wheel. Kathy Rosaskos, congratulations. Now we have 1 more winner to spin the wheel on. Kyle White, congratulations. That was our final winner of the day. And this also concludes our session. I want to thank you all for attending. We hope you have been able to learn and enjoy from the sessions today hosted by CSNM and Alberta Networking Group. I want to also give a final thank you to the Alberta Networking Group, networking room participants, Robin Froze, Yatao Zhu, Samira Sahid, and Alicia Wheeler, as well as Tracy Christensen, and to Daphne Spear, CNM Board Portfolio Manager, for their time monitoring all of those networking rooms. And hopefully, I'm sure that we had some very interesting chats in those rooms. So I'd like to just say a final goodbye to all, and have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you for your participation in our fall symposium. Thank you very much.